For this first project, we're going to keep it simple. Here's an example of what it will look like, just a simple scrolling and a zooming in. Sometimes I show you what not to do, what I don't want to see. So at the end here, you can see how we see a little bit of the blue edge. Watch in this corner over here. This is what I don't want to see because that looks kind of messy at the end. So I want it to look like it's continuous and you be thinking about your composition and don't do that. Right there where you see a little bit of the blue on the edge. So keep it super, just think about keeping it super clean and you'll see as we're building it how to actually do that. So for this first project, it's okay if it looks very similar to mine. There's not a lot of creativity involved in this first project. It's really about you learning the techniques and the skills. So you don't have to think of an entirely new composition or idea. You can do this cityscape with some hills behind it and some potted plants or trees in the front. What I'm really wanting you to do is learn how to navigate this new software and learn how to use these very specific techniques. So to start, we're going to open up Adobe Animate, and if you can't find it, you can just search and type in Animate and it should come up. And you'll probably just see this panel opened up, and we want to pick WebGL. Now you should have done your introduction, history, and overview and read about what all this stuff means, but WebGL stands for Web Graphics Library. So we're just going to click on that. And the default size is pretty small. So if you come over into your properties up here, if you don't see properties open, just go to Window and find properties right here. Make sure it's checked. And this is where if any of these panels, if you see that I'm using one of these panels and you don't have them open in yours, do not worry. They're up here and you can just find them in Window and turn them back on. Or if you accidentally turn them off. So we see properties here and then we see properties again. So it might be closed and you just click to toggle it open. So what we want to do is change the size. The default size here is 550 by 400 and we want to make it HD, which is you just click on it. That's 1920 and then you can press tab to get to the height. So 1920 by 1080. That's HD size. And you want to make sure this is unclicked because you don't want to lock that. You don't want that to be locked. So there is our canvas that we've created, or our stage. And another thing you want to check in here, the default frames per second is 24. This is different for a lot of different kinds of animations and depending on the time period, but the most common, the most standard is around 24 to 30. So we're just going to keep it at the default 24. Now, you can see that my canvas got a lot bigger. And so what we can do is come up here, see where it says 100%. You can just go fit in Window and then you can see the whole thing. You can zoom out by doing Control and minus and zoom in and do Control plus. So that works. What doesn't work in this program, if you're familiar with other Adobe programs, is Control 0 to fit, to fill the screen. That doesn't work, but the hand does work. So if you press the space bar, you can move around and get that little hand, but you cannot do Control 0. So it's either Control plus to zoom in, Control negative to zoom out, or just come up here and fit it in the window. We're gonna zoom out a little bit because we're doing this scrolling motion and we're gonna need to build our scene larger than the actual stage that's on here. So we're going to just add a color to the background of the stage, and I interchangeably call it the canvas and the stage. I'm talking about the same thing. I'm talking about this white rectangle here, which is what you'll be able to see when it's rendered out. So I'm going to change the color of the stage. Again, I'm in properties, the same one that I changed the size in, and see it says stage and then there's rectangle. Just click on it and you can pick any swatch. We're doing a scene, so I'm going to do blue as if it was the sky. And that's basically all you have to do to change the stage color. At this point, I recommend saving and getting in the habit of saving a lot in case animation can be heavy on your computer, and if stuff crashes, you want to make sure to save. So get in the habit of doing Control S, and the first time you're going to choose where to save it, name it, and make folders. So I have a folder for this class, 211 Animate, and then I have a folder for each week, and you can call it week 1, scroll, zoom, or landscape, or whatever makes sense to you. You can see the file extension is .fla from when this program used to be called Flash, which you learned in your history lesson, and then just save. So now it's organized in a folder within a folder. You'll always be able to find it, and you can just press Control S to save anytime you make big changes. So just like in other Adobe programs, we have workspaces, and you can change them by coming up to here, Window, and then Workspaces. I'm working in Classic right now. You might have opened yours up in Essentials, which looks like that, and that just moves the timeline to the bottom. I work in Classic a lot. It's really up to you and how you like working. This has more options open, and it has the timeline on the top. It doesn't matter, that's a personal preference thing, but if you're ever wondering why my screen looks different than yours, you just get that back by going Window, Workspaces. Okay, so I'm going to start building the road and the buildings that you saw in the beginning. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see what's happening in the frames up here in the timeline. So see these little mountain, big mountain? I'm just scrolling so you can see what's going on. All of these little rectangles here, you can click on them and see them, are a frame. So remember we had 24 frames per second. Here's 1 second, and that's the 24th actual frame. So you can adjust each frame. We're gonna learn a lot about this, but just so you know what all of these little things are. And this was the same in Flash, these frames set up like this. So you just double click on a layer like in other Adobe programs to rename it. Very important to get in the habit of naming your layers in this and all programs. So I'm gonna call this city. So we're gonna do the sidewalk and the buildings all on one layer. So all you have to do is come into the rectangle tool, and right here on the bottom, there's the stroke color with the little pencil and the fill color, which has a paint bucket. So you can click on it and you can pick, a gray for the sidewalk, and we can now we want to make it super long, right? Because we're going to scroll. So let me zoom out. I want to make it probably twice as long as the actual stage so we can have it scrolling to the side, and that's how we're going to make it look like it's scrolling, is that there's going to be more buildings and stuff off to the side, and we're just going to animate it moving. So I've drawn that rectangle. I can come and make it bigger. So this is the free transform tool. It's Q on your keyboard, and I can just click on that and I can just drag it out. And you see it drags out from the center, which maybe you don't want. If you don't want that, you can hold Alt and just drag it out from one side. So that's the center there. So I'm gonna make it a little longer just to give myself some more space. So I could do it exactly twice the size by lining that white dot in the center up with the edge of my stage, or I can make it a little longer. So this is, let's say this is the street, and notice what happened in the timeline. Once I drew something in the layer, the little dot changed. So let me do Control Z. New Control Z to before I drew it, and watch the dot in the layer. See, the dot is not filled in, and then when I draw a rectangle, the dot, the keyframe, the point there, which is called a keyframe, fills in to be solid. saying that there is something happening in that frame, that something exists in that frame. So just noticing what's happening up here in the timeline. So animation is just a sequence of frames with different things happening in the frames, things moving and changing, and that's all that animation is. It's different points, and each of those points has a different value attached to it. Okay, so I can move this around with the selection, this top selection tool, which is V on the keyboard, like it is in other Adobe programs. And when I click on it, it has these dots that come up, making it known that it's selected, so I can move it up and down anywhere I want. And so this is gonna represent the street. And you can also use the arrow tools to move it around, and I can press the space bar and the hand shows up to see more of what's happening. Then I can come back into the rectangle tool and I can make kind of the lip of the curve. Maybe I'll make that a darker color. And I can draw that on top. And then if I want to make it smaller, maybe I'll zoom in and I'll come to my free transform, click on it. I'm holding Alt and I'm just making that a little smaller. You want to be careful of horizontal lines that are too thin. If they're 1 pixel, they'll look kind of shaky in the rendering of the animation. So just be careful of horizontal and vertical lines that are too thin. And then I'm going to make another layer for the top of like my sidewalk, and we'll make lines in the sidewalk to make it look like it's in perspective. But let's just make another rectangle. And you can even make it lighter, like if the sun is hitting it, and just to differentiate. So there are those 3 long rectangles on top of each other to start. And if you want more space, you can select them all and move it down with the arrow or up, and you can adjust them. One thing to note, if I just select like this, you're probably used to other Adobe programs that if you just select part of an object, it selects the whole thing. But in Adobe Animate, no, it does that, it cuts it up. So just be aware of that and don't get frustrated if you're trying to move stuff around quickly and it breaks it up into pieces. That's a big difference with this program. So if you want to move something, you have to select, marquee select around the entire thing to move the whole thing, or it's just going to take out a chunk. So you'll see some other differences in this program as we go along, and I'll try to point them all out. Okay, so now I'm going to make a building, and I'm going to make a rectangle and add a stroke. Make it a different color so you can see what I'm doing. And then I just click on here to add a stroke. Maybe I'll make the stroke really bright so you can see it. If I want to increase the stroke size, you come up into the properties, and remember I said a 1-point stroke is not good because it will look all wobbly and shaky. So let's make it 4. And now I'll just draw a rectangle for the building. And let me zoom in so you can see what's happening. So that is hard to see. I'm going to change the stroke color so it's much darker and easier for you to see. All right, there we go. So there's my stroke, and you have a couple options in here. You can change the stroke size, you can change the style, the width. You can also make the cap rounded or square. And the join can be mitered. A miter join, see the difference here, is more what you would think of a building because it has that straight right angle rather than the first one had the round. So just think about, there's a ton of these options that you can play with. So just take a look at all of those. I'm going to come into my selection tool, and I can select on these and just press delete to get rid of them. Now, one thing to be aware of, another thing that can happen is if I'm in the selection tool and I want to select on this and delete, it only deletes the straight up into the angle, this section of the line. So it doesn't change the whole thing. And this is helpful, but also sometimes difficult to get used to. So just know what the program is capable of and what the differences are if you're used to working in Illustrator or and being able to grab the entire stroke. That is one thing that's different. So they won't all move together. Okay, so I can select on this and I can change the color, and then I can start moving it around. I can also start building maybe some windows. So I'm going to do no stroke for the windows and make the fill a much lighter color. So I can do a door. You can obviously spend more time making yours look more realistic than mine. I'm going to press V to get into my selection, and you can make copies of it by holding Alt and dragging out a copy. Now, if you don't make a copy of it, I'm not pressing Alt, I'm in the selection tool. That cuts out a hole when I move it once. You can hold Alt to make a copy, but then if you move it, it's going to cut a hole. So just be aware of how this program is different from other programs that you've used. So to make some windows, I'm going to come and make a square here. I'm pressing V to get into my selection, and then I'm holding Alt and making the other window. I'm V in my selection, I'm holding Alt and dragging out a copy, and then I'm releasing my mouse and then releasing the key, the Alt key. Now I have one selected, I'm going to hold Shift and select both. Now I'm pressing Alt, then clicking and dragging the copy out, then I'm releasing the mouse, then releasing the Alt key. Now if I just click and drag without pressing Alt, it's cutting a hole. So you can see the gray through this and you can see the blue background through this. So that's not what you want. You want to do, so I would just do Control Z. I still have both selected. You can see they have the dots in them. Now I'm pressing Alt, I'm clicking with my mouse and dragging the copy out, then releasing the mouse, then releasing Alt. So I don't want to see any holes in your building. And now what you can do after this is you can, in your selection tool, you can select this whole thing, being careful not to take some of the sidewalk with you, and press Alt and drag a copy out. And then you can use the free transform tool to make it a different size. You want to hold Shift to keep the aspect ratio. So you can play around with making copies. What I like to do, I'm just going to get rid of that, is make a couple buildings, different sizes and different shapes and different styles. So I'm going to pick another color rectangle, and I'm going to make another building of a different shape, and then I'm going to pick a color for the windows. I'll make these windows yellow, and make, maybe this building has 2 doors, and it probably would make sense to make your doors all the same size. So Control Z, I'm going to press V, select on this, press Alt, click and drag out a copy for another door, press Alt again, click and drag out a copy for a third door, and then you can make, I don't know, you can make up different kinds of windows that look interesting to you. And I'm going to press V, click on this, and hold Alt and click and drag out a copy. So think about a couple of different window shapes and building shapes you can make with these tools that we have, these simple tools. You can really do a lot with them. So maybe I'll make a taller building. And then if I don't like that color, I can press V, click on it, and just come here and change the color. And then I want to make the window, but I'm still clicked on this. So I want to click out of it, get it in the right place, click out of it, and then I can change the color for my window color. So, and my door color. And maybe your doors and windows will be different colors. Totally up to you. So there's a door, and maybe these windows will look like this. So I'm pressing V, selecting it, holding Alt and making a copy, releasing the mouse. I'm holding Shift to select both, holding Alt and dragging out a copy, releasing, pressing Alt, clicking, dragging out a copy, releasing the mouse, releasing Alt, and then continuing to do that. So maybe get 4 or 5 buildings, and then you can, so yours is going to look more interesting than mine. Then you can select that group of buildings, make sure they're all selected and you don't grab any of the sidewalk. I can zoom out by pressing Control minus, and then I'm holding the Alt key down, then I'm clicking and dragging out a copy. And maybe I'll move it down a little bit more. Oh, you can see what happened here. That cut out a piece of that because I was overlapped on it. So just be careful about stuff like that. So I'm Control Z to go back. I'm taking another copy. I'm giving it some space. And then while this is still selected, I can come to Modify, Transform, and you can flip horizontal and just flip it around to give it a little different of a look. And then maybe I'll make another building in between so it doesn't look so obvious that I'm just copying and pasting stuff. So you can make a couple different buildings to fill in the space. And I think you guys can go off in this and make some really awesome stuff. So you would add windows and doors, and then you could, even after you created one long line, if you wanted a lot of scrolling on yours, you can then select this again, zoom out, hold Alt, and give yourself another row. So you want to fill at least double the length of your stage with buildings. And the next thing we're going to do is create some perspective lines to make the sidewalk look like it is a sidewalk going back in space. Okay, so make sure to be saving often, Control S, and then I'm going to zoom in with Control plus plus. So I want to make some lines that are going back into space to look like perspective. So I'm going to pick the line tool. I have my stroke color as a dark gray, and I could just draw a diagonal line, right? And I could press V and hold Alt and make a copy. But what's happening that you can see right here is that there's a little, that doesn't look very clean. You could change the cap maybe to try to make it round, but that still does not look great. So I'm gonna delete these, and what we can do is we can make a rectangle, and I'm gonna do no stroke, which is just with this little line, red line through it up here. So that means no stroke. You can also do no fill. I'm gonna make it the gray color, dark gray color, and I can make a rectangle the entire width of the sidewalk. I'm going to come into the transform tool, which is this guy here, press on it. Okay, this is a good lesson. What happened is because this is connected and it's the same color as this stripe on my sidewalk down here, it all became one object. So now it's all selecting everything, and that is not what I want. So I'm gonna do Control Z, and I'm gonna make this a darker color. I'm just making it black to make this easier to see. Come back into my rectangle, make this line, transform tool, so I'm transforming, and see how, let me zoom in a little more. See how the cursor changes? Okay, see how the cursor changes to those two lines? It's kind of hard to see, but I'll and then you can skew it like that. So you can make the diagonal lines and they line up exactly with the sidewalk. But the problem is it cut out a hole. Fills cut out holes, strokes do not. So this is great for some things that you're going to need in this program, but for what we're trying to do here, that does not look good. So I'm going to Control Z, get out of here. So the solution, instead of making that diagonal line on the actual sidewalk, we're going to come out here into the gray area, which is where you're going to be making a lot of different items, and make the line that way. So I'm going to make it the size of my sidewalk. I'm going to come into the transform, click on it, come to the bottom so that the cursor changes, and make it that diagonal. And then I can come in and fit it into my sidewalk. And if you made yours too long or too short, you can just come back into the transform tool and fix the size. So now that I have that, I can make copies of the line. So you can select it and Alt drag copies. So let me zoom out. So it's selected with the selection tool. I'm pressing Alt and I'm dragging out a copy. And you can see these lines that are showing up as I'm moving around. They're like guidelines. They're called alignment hinting. And that can help you set them up all at the same distance. So this is kind of an enormous sidewalk. And you can see if I move it again without pressing Alt, it's going to leave a hole. So just be careful about that. So I wanted to give it more space and I just did some undos to get back here. So I'm selected, pressing Alt, dragging out a copy, and you're going to make yours look a lot better than mine, but I'll just show you a quick way to do this, pressing Alt, dragging out a copy. So after you make a couple, get them spaced properly, you can hold Shift and then press Alt and make a copy of all three of those. And just make sure they're spaced correctly. And then you can hold Shift and grab the ones you want. I just clicked again when I clicked on this by accident, and see it selected it because it's dotted, and I just still holding Shift, selected again. So I'm selected on all of these lines, and I'm going to zoom out so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm using the hand to move over, and I'm holding Alt and dragging out that copy. And then I probably don't need that many more, so I'm just going to click out here to deselect and hold Shift and just select 3 of these and then hold Alt. So if you're making repeating items, you don't have to copy each one. Kind of make groups in your mind, and then then it makes it easier to make something that large. So this sidewalk is obviously huge. You're going to spend some more time making yours look the appropriate proportions and stuff, but for our purposes, that's fine. Build yourself a city, give yourself some windows, doors, sidewalk lines, and make it as interesting as you can with these simple tools that we have. Okay, so make sure you're saving. When there's a little asterisk here next to the file name, it means it's not saved. So you want to Control S and make sure to save often, especially after you've built your entire city. All right, so now we're going to animate it. So we need to group everything together so it moves together as an animation. So you can select everything either I'm in the selection tool, which is V on the keyboard, and I can do a big marquee selection around everything. Or if I want to select everything, I can just do Control A, and that actually I think is a better option when you're wanting to select everything, because you don't miss anything. And as you saw before, sometimes you can accidentally miss a portion and then that whole part is not selected. So I'm going to do Control Z to get out of there, and then just do Control A to make sure everything is selected. Now we need to group it so we can make it move together. And the way to do that is Modify, Convert to Symbol. And we want the type to be a graphic. So make sure it's a graphic, and you want to name all of your symbols. For this project, it might seem extra to name it, but it's an important thing to get in a habit of. And when you're in the beginning and when you're learning stuff, creating good habits is super important. So I'm just going to name this City and press OK. And so now when I click on it, you can see it's all grouped together, and I can move it all around together. Get it back. So now we're going to work in the timeline, and you want to click. This is the first frame in the timeline right here, number 1. And I'm going to right click on that first frame and create motion tween. Tween is just short for in between. And it's going to make a solid line on the timeline. See that timeline change? I'm going to do Control Z so you can see. Watch what the timeline looks like right now. And then right click, create motion tween. Now we have the solid line. And that's the motion tween. So what the program does is it automatically animates everything in between these two points, or you can make however many points you want on the timeline. So the program is actually doing a lot of work for us. I think you'll see what that means when we start getting further into it. So this red bar here is the time marker, the timeline indicator. I'll call it the marker or the red thing, but I think marker is the official word. So we're going to drag it to the end here to make another keyframe. This dot is the first keyframe, and that's where we're starting. So we have our city in the position where we want it to start. Then we need to move the timeline down and tell the program where we want it to end up. So my marker's here at the end, and I'm just clicking and dragging, and I'm holding Shift to keep it straight. So if I didn't hold Shift, it would go all around. I'm gonna do Control Z. If I hold Shift, I can just easily drag it. And remember in the beginning when I was showing you mine, there was some blue space that showed up, so you don't want that. You want it to look good and clean. So you want it to overlap a little bit, whatever your illustration is. Have it end with, give it a little extra space here. And you can see that this other keyframe, this dot here, well, it's a diamond, was changed. And we can also see this blue dotted line, which is the animation path. So we can move the timeline indicator to see what's happening. You've made an animation. It's just 2 points, and the in between, the program has, for us, created everything that happens in between these 2 points. So we just need to tell it where it starts and where it stops, and the program does the rest of it. That's basically what a motion tween is. You can come here to this little play button and watch it, or you can move this and watch it faster. Sometimes that's good. It's called, you can scrub it, so it's just easier to see stuff if you have a longer animation. So your animation is going to be 10 seconds. This is only 1 second right here. 10 seconds, we have 24 frames per second, so 10 times 24 is 240. So we need to make this 10 seconds. So how we do that is we're gonna zoom out, and we have these little mountains, and I'm gonna zoom out, and kindly the program is giving us the seconds on top, and we can see 10 seconds here. So to make it 10 seconds, all you do is click on here and drag the bar to 240. Oh, let me get it back. And now we can play it, and it's lasting for 10 seconds. And you can see that it's a lot slower because the space between those 2 keyframes is longer on the timeline, slowing down the rate of the animation, the speed of the animation. Okay, so now we're going to make some hills to go in the background, and I'm going to move my marker here all the way back to the front. And to start, we're going to start with a new layer. So just like in other programs, it's this little piece of paper for a new layer, and you really want to get it in the habit of naming them. So I'm going to call this hills, and I'm going to drag it below the city because it'll be behind. I'm going to be in my rectangle tool, and I don't want a stroke on it, so I'm pressing this red slash, and I'll make it a darker green. And I'm just going to make a long rectangle that is as long as my city, or a little bit longer. You can give yourself some more space. And this is just going to be about where I want my hills to live. So now that I've created that, I'm going to turn the eye off on my city so that I don't get distracted by them. You can also lock it. So you just come here, there's a little lock if it's locked, and then we can turn the eye off to not see it. And then we can come build the curves. So obviously this doesn't look like a hill yet. So I'm in the selection tool, and see how let me zoom in here, which is V, it's the selection tool is V on the keyboard, and see how the cursor changes to an arrow with a little curve on it. So you need to get to that, and I'll zoom out so you can see what happens, and you can add curves. You can add all kinds of curves. You don't want to do that, but you can add a nice curve for what your hill will look like. And then you can come in with the tool right below the selection tool, which is the sub-selection tool. It's A on the keyboard, and you can adjust those curves. So you have to click in a very specific spot. You can't just click on the shape itself, nothing happens. You have to click on the edge, and see how the cursor changes. There's a little square that shows up. Now I can click on the points here, and I can move them, and I can also move the handles and change the shape of the curve, just like in Adobe Illustrator if you've used Illustrator before. So definitely play around with that. And you can also delete some of these points and add more points. So an easy way to add points is just to come back into the selection tool, V, and I'm just adding more curves here. And just take your time and make them look however you want. And now you can see, I can come back into A, my sub-selection tool, and I can click on the edge here, and we can see that we can make all kinds of adjustments. And maybe I don't like this point, and the point is selected when it's filled in with the color. So this one is not selected because it's white inside. It is selected when it's filled in. So if it's selected on just that point, I can press delete and get rid of it. And then I can come back into my selection tool, and I can make a different curve if I want. So you can spend a lot of time getting this right and making your hills, mountains, look whatever shape you want. So now we're going to add a gradient to the hills just to give the illusion of depth and of space to make them a little more interesting. So I'm clicked on them. They're selected with the direct selection tool, so they have the dots in them, so that's how you know they're selected. And up here in the color window, if you don't see it, just come to Window, make sure Color is checked. And sometimes swatches will be what's open as the default, so you want to be in the color one. And you can select Linear Gradient. And it's going to have a built-in one. This is just the last one I created. So you can change the color to really whatever you want with these sliders here on this gradient. Okay, so if you have one of the funky gradients and you have a lot going on and you want to get back to just a simple gradient, you can click here on the fill color, and you can just pick the first one, which is a default two-tone gradient. And this is actually probably what will show up immediately when you choose linear gradient for the first time. And then to change the colors, you just click on one of the boxes here in the slider, and you can just pick a color here, or you can double click and your swatches will show up. And you can click here, double click, and your swatches will show up. So probably from a light green to a dark green is good. You can adjust the gradient. You can add more colors by double clicking. So see how the cursor changes to a plus? I can add another color there. And then you can switch them around just by sliding them. So you can really do a lot with this gradient. And if you get stuck and want to get back to the basic one, you can just click on the black and white and get back to the two-tone gradient. So as you can see, it's not really going in the direction I want it to go in. So to change the direction of the gradient, I use the paint bucket tool, which I know seems a little strange, but that's what you do. So we're in the paint bucket tool. So sometimes that paint bucket tool, I was having a little trouble when I was actually selected on the object. So I think it was the way I was drawing it. So you can select out of it, so nothing's selected. In my color, the linear gradient is still active, and then I can come into the paint bucket tool and you can just click and drag out. And now I'm moving my mouse side to side to affect the angle, and then I'm just dragging down. And the longer you drag it, you can drag outside, you can end the drag outside of the object, but you have to start within it. And the longer you drag it, the more smooth that gradient's gonna be. The less you drag it, the more of like a straight line it will be. So you wanna give it some space. So I'm starting to draw the gradient inside the object, and then I can pull it as far down as I want. So just give yours a little highlight, and then again, if you want it to be angled a little bit, I'm just moving the mouse side to side. So play around with this. If you get stuck, sometimes if you have it selected, mine wasn't working as well, but now that looks a little better. So you can do it when it's selected, or if it's not selected, you can apply that gradient with the paint bucket tool. So you kind of can do it either way. So just apply a gradient to your background hills, and now we're gonna have to convert it into a symbol to make it move with the rest of the city. So I'm going to go into my selection tool, I'm gonna click on it, and there's a different way. There's two ways to convert to symbol. The first way we came up to modify, convert to symbol, but a way that I usually use that's a little faster is just to right click, convert to symbol. There's also a key command. So we wanna call this hills. And we want it to be, same thing, a graphic, and press OK. So now it looks like that. We can turn the city back on so we can see what's happening. And then we can make a motion tween. So I'm in the hills layer. I made it a symbol, and I'm clicking on the first frame, right clicking on the first frame, and create motion tween. And it's automatically going to create the tween the same length as as the other layer. So then I'm just moving the marker, and we can look at where the end is lining up. So let's take a look. So the end of my city, and you do yourself a favor by making your hills the same exact length as your city. So I'm bringing the marker to the end, and then I'm just clicking on the hills, holding shift, and same thing, dragging it over. And I would have made my life a lot easier if I just had lined my hills up with the edge. And we can see, because this layer is a different color, the animation path here is the color of that layer. So let's go to fit in window and see what that looks like from the beginning. I'm going to bring the marker back, and I'm going to press play, and we can see what that looks like. And I have that layer selected, so we can see the path, which is fine. But you can just test and see how that looks. And that looks totally fine. I know that some of you might be thinking that the hills should be moving at a slower pace because they're further away in the distance. But for this project, we're just going to keep it super simple. If you want to try doing that, you can, but you do not have to. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, we'll get to it. Okay, so now I'm going to make some shrubs or potted plants. You can make trees, just some simple greenery to add some details in here. So I'm doing Control minus to get out so I can see what I'm doing. I'm moving my marker back to the front. It's always a good habit to move your marker back to the beginning, because if you start changing the size and moving stuff around, it's going to animate it and add another keyframe. So if you had your marker in here and you move something around, you can see it adds another keyframe, and then your animation is going to be like, what? And it's going to get all crazy. So just Control Z and get in the habit of moving the marker back to the beginning so you don't drive yourself nuts. Okay, I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to call it plants. And I'm going to draw my plant out here in the gray area. I'm holding the space bar, and I'm just going to be like a planter that sits on the sidewalk. So I'm going to start with a simple rectangle, and I don't want a stroke. Oh, maybe I do want a stroke, but I don't want it to be that color. So I'm going to pick, maybe it's like a terracotta plant pot. So I'm going to draw that for my planter, and then I'm going to press V, and I'm going to go into my curve and make it a little rounded so it looks three-dimensional. The top doesn't really matter because we're going to cover it up. And then I'm going to add some really simple circle shapes for the actual foliage. So no stroke. I'm going to fill it in with green. And what's cool about this program is any overlapping shapes, it automatically becomes one shape. So now that those are overlapping, they're automatically one thing. So you can just start building, and you can even start with like a big shape and then build little details coming off of it. Up to you. So just keep making yours. You're going to spend more time on it than I have for this demonstration here. But I think you get the idea. You're just going to build off, make some kind of interesting plant shape. And now this is all one. And we can see why the top didn't matter, because remember that cuts that off. So I'm going to do Control Z, get it on top. What we can do for this is we can add a gradient to make it look more three-dimensional. So I can do a linear gradient, and I can make this like a highlight in the middle and shadows on the edges, dark around the edges. So you guys can play around with that. And that can give the illusion of 3 dimensions. Click out of that. So it looks like a rounded pot. If you want to add another gradient in there, you can feel free to do so. So for this, we're going to make it a graphic symbol, and we're going to use the library to repeat it over and over again in an easy way. And this is something you're going to end up doing a lot. So just an introduction to what the library is. So I'm using the selection tool, V on the keyboard. I'm doing a marquee select around the whole thing to make sure my whole plant is selected. And then I'm right-clicking and converting to symbol. You could go modify, convert to symbol as well. I'm going to call it plant. And it's a graphic for the type. And you can see that the folder is library root. So it's going into my library. I'm pressing OK. And now we can see the library down here. If you don't see this, you come into your window to get it open, but it should be open. Now we can see all the different things we have in the library that we've made. These are all the symbols that we've created in our library. And what I can do is I can just take this and drag it, and it makes as many copies as I want. And the nice thing about this is when it's grouped and when it's a symbol, it doesn't cut out what's behind it, even if it was on the same layer. So that is a really nice feature and a reason to use the library. And what you can do is you can change some of the color in the color effect here in the properties. So you can open up the color effect, you can change the style, you can change the brightness, you can make it darker or lighter. You can make each one a little bit different. You can come to advanced. The alpha is the transparency. So 0 is see-through. 100 is totally opaque. You can change some of the tone of the reds. This is going to change the greens. And this is going to change the blues, which isn't going to show anything because there's no blue in there. You can also play around with the tint. So you can make little adjustments to each, and then I can come into the library and pull out another one, and it's going to look the same as the original that I created. So I can just click on each and adjust them, get them. I can move this one. So you can make yours look more interesting than mine and placed better and take your time. And then same thing, we're going to want to animate these. So I'm gonna make one of mine at the very end of my sidewalk. Like, this is what I was talking about with the hills, that it would make your life easy if you just made it at the end, because then you'll know where your animation path should end. Okay. So I can lock my other layers, and then I can just marquee select those plants. I can right click and convert to symbol, and I can call them plants animate. So that's one big symbol. It's graphic, again, same thing. Press OK. Now these are all one big symbol that I can animate easily. I'm on this layer, and I'm right clicking and creating the motion tween. And then I'm moving the marquee to the end. See how the plants aren't moving because we haven't moved them yet. So I'm holding down Shift, and I'm just moving them. And now see that I had it lined up with the end of my sidewalk. I can line it, the last plant, up with the end of my sidewalk where I know I want it to end, so it's at the same speed. And then we can test it. So we can come into Fit in Window. You can scroll the marquee to the beginning, and you can press play to see how it's going to look. And that looks pretty good. Okay, one more thing we're going to learn is how to zoom. So the nice thing about this program is that these are vector shapes, and if we zoom all the way in, they're not pixelated. So it's just like Illustrator. I can see something got cut off there, but I'm not going to worry about it. It's a lot like Illustrator where stuff doesn't get pixelated. So you can zoom in really far and everything will still look crisp and clear and awesome. So I'm going to zoom out. We're going to add some keyframes in the middle to make it zoom in and then zoom out. So I want to select everything, and to do that, first I need to unlock any layers that I have locked, and I can press Control A. So everything is selected, and I can move the timeline marker to where I want it to start zooming, maybe somewhere in the middle, like around 5 is obviously in the middle of 10 seconds. So I have everything selected. Control A. We can see everything selected. We can come into the Transform tool, and we don't need to convert it to a symbol. See, if I right click, convert to a symbol is grayed out and not an option because everything is already made as a symbol. So if you did have some things that you didn't make a symbol yet, you would need to convert them to a symbol to make them move at this point. But so far, if you're following along, everything should already be a symbol. So I have everything selected. Control A. I'm in my Transform tool, and I can press Shift and zoom in. And you can see automatically, if you notice, I'm going to press Control Z. Watch where the timeline marker is. Watch the timeline. Once I release, I'm zooming, I'm holding Shift, zooming, I'm releasing my mouse. And 3 keyframes on each layer were created automatically when I made that change. And then I can move the timeline marker down a little bit more. I can press Control A. I can be in the transform tool, the free transform tool, and I can hold Shift and zoom in as much as I want. And then I can kind of see how it's going to end. And the thing that I was talking about in the beginning is you don't want yours to end up, oops. You don't want yours to end like something funny like that with the edge of the hills. Like that is not going to look great. I don't want to see that. So make sure, I'm going to press Control Z, make sure whatever's inside your stage, what we're seeing looks awesome and there's not any weird stuff at the end. So make it look clean. It can be super simple, but make it look clean. Like even this is probably not great for my city. So maybe I should just move it back so it ends like that. Okay, so I'm gonna do fit in window. I'm gonna bring my marker back to the beginning and we can see how that looks. So we can see that the tween animates the zoom, everything in between those keyframes has been animated. So have some kind of zooming in, zooming out, and scrolling across. And I wanna see at least 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of keyframes on your layers. Okay, so you should be saving. So Control S, make sure to save. And now we're gonna export it. So we go to File, Export, and we're gonna do Export Video. Export Movie gives you a series of JPEGs or PNGs that you can then bring into another program and do some post-production, but for our purposes, we are going to do Export Video. This pops up and it's exporting it as a .mov file, which still needs to be compressed. So there's another step. So make sure you follow these steps or you're not gonna be able to upload it to YouTube. So you want convert video in Adobe Media Encoder. Adobe Media Encoder comes with all Adobe CC products, so you should have it on your computer. If you're working from home, you can download it from the Creative Cloud and they're on all of the school computers. So things you want to check that the render size are the same size, the high definition 1920 by 1080, and you want to check that this convert video in Adobe Media Encoder is checked. Now it's going to save it automatically wherever your Animate, your .fla file was saved. You can change it here in Browse, but if you're organized with your files, you should be fine. Now we're going to go to Export, and it takes a minute, let it work, and it will open up Adobe Media Encoder. If you have an older computer, you might want to open up Adobe Media Encoder and just have it open to help your computer out. So this is Adobe Media Encoder, and we can see the .mov file was created. So it put it into Adobe Media Encoder as an MOV file, but we need to make it an MP4 to be ready to upload to YouTube, and it's just a better file type, more universal, it's more compressed. So there's one major thing we want to change. If this doesn't say H.264, you can select it from here. So I've just clicked on that little arrow and make sure H.264 is selected. There's obviously a lot of options here, but this is what we're using. And then to change the options, you can come into Custom. Another window is going to open up, these export settings. And this is where you can change where the file is named and where it's going to, if you didn't change it in the Browse option before. So you can click on here and choose the destination, and you can change the file name that way as well. So obviously export video and audio you want to make sure are checked. Here in video is what we want to change the bit rate. So this is pretty low, the 10 and the 12, and we want to make it 25. So you want to make sure both bit rates target bitrate, and it automatically then changes the maximum bitrate to be the same. So you want to make sure that is the one thing that you change so it looks better. And then we just press OK, but nothing happens yet. So this is an important step that a lot of people forget to do. So we've changed the settings, we've made sure it's all set up, but we still have to press the play button. So don't forget, after you press OK, that's just setting your settings. Then you have to press play to actually render it, and you can see it happening down here. It's encoding, and it should happen pretty fast. There's a check mark when it's done. So then you can come into wherever your file is, and the MP4 should show up. And then that MP4 file is what you'll upload to YouTube. One more thing, it's okay if yours is stuttering and not totally smooth the way mine is. I'm not expecting anything crazy, and you can see my plants are not moving so great with the rest of mine. So just do the best you can. It's mostly about learning the techniques for this project. So have fun with it. Just as long as you're getting these techniques down and feeling more comfortable navigating through the program, that is my greatest hope for you for this project. All right, have fun.